You're listening to the Talking Air Filtration Podcast, where you get to know the people that make air filtration possible and help us all breathe easier. Because clean air matters.
We'll get insights from air filtration professionals and learn how they became successful in their careers. Along the way, we will discuss best practices, guidelines, trends, and challenges in air filtration in a variety of applications. We hope HVAC, air filtration, and indoor air quality pros, including business development, engineering, building owners, and facilities management, will enjoy the insights our guests will bring to this podcast.
Our next speaker is someone who many of us met earlier this morning doing the tour of the new ASHRAE facility. It's a net zero facility. And I was telling Jeff earlier that not only is it the coolest facility I've ever seen, it's actually one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So if you didn't get a chance to do that and you're interested in building technology, try to look these guys up and get some information from that building because it was excellent. ASHRAE is the authority on all things HVAC, including filtration, and NAFA is working on expanding our partnership. Jeff is going to update us on what's happening with ASHRAE and how you can get more involved. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Littleton to the stage.
All right, thanks very much. Welcome to ASHRAE's home city of Atlanta. We ordered really good weather for you, so you're welcome for that. We had 50 people out visiting ASHRAE headquarters this morning, early afternoon. I thought it went really well. I already heard some good reports, so if you missed that tour, you're welcome to come out and see us anytime. We're very, very proud of the building. It's a net zero. We renovated a 1978 building to net zero energy performance, and it's got a radiant system and on-site PV and not a lot of duct work. It's a very unusual building. Come out and see it. I think you'll like it a lot. All right, so I was asked to talk a little bit about ASHRAE and who we are, talk a little bit about our priorities going forward, and also talk about how you can get involved. So the first thing I want to say is we are big fans of the filtration industry. We're big fans of everyone in this room. We're big fans of NAFA, right? So we just signed an MOU with NAFA, and we're looking at ways that we can collaborate more effectively with NAFA and with the people in this room. So we signed it in 2021, and Emily and her team does a great job for you. We are big fans of NAFA, so we want to explore ways that we can work together more effectively. So what about ASHRAE? So we have 53,000 members in 130 countries, 198 chapters, 15 regions, 5,500 student members, 400 plus student branches, and we're about to hit 130 years. So we've been around for a little while. And you can see our mission and vision. I really like the vision, a healthy and sustainable built environment for all. But we can't do that if NAFA doesn't accomplish its mission. There is a direct tie between NAFA's doing its mission and ASHRAE's doing its mission, the work that you do and obviously the work that ASHRAE does. So we need you, right? We need the experts in this room. So how does ASHRAE do what it does? You can see the list here, but I'm going to focus on that kind of small list on the right. We have 33 standing or sort of administrative committees. We have 130 standards and guideline committees. So those are the committees that actually write our standards and update our standards and our guidelines. So a guideline is a standard-like document that doesn't go through the full ANSI process, and we have a lot of guidelines. We have a little bit more flexibility writing a guideline versus a conventional standard. We have 100 plus technical committees. I'm going to really zero in. We referenced one earlier, really zero in on the technical committees because that's sort of the technical heart and soul of the society. 300 publications. Just like NAFA has certification programs, ASHRAE has 7 certification programs, 200 plus educational courses. And we do research. We spend about $5 million doing research. And I think that the filter industry is one of those areas that's really, really ripe for research. So what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about is how to get engaged with our TCs so that you can get engaged in supporting ASHRAE research. And I don't mean financially supporting, but putting forth research proposals, for example, that might be relevant to your industry. So we run conferences all over the world. I hope many of you, how many people are here for the HR Expo in Atlanta? I see a lot of hands. Thank you very much. We appreciate your being here. And of course, the ASHRAE conference there. We run conferences all over the world. We're a publisher, ASHRAE Journal, you know about that. ASHRAE Handbook has a lot of good filtration content in it. If you haven't checked that out, perhaps you should. The way you engage with standards at ASHRAE will revolve heavily around our online standards database, right? So if you're concerned, for example, there are 4 new addenda coming up for standard 52.2, which is the method of test standard, of course, for filters. If you're concerned about that, then the online comment database is one way that you can get involved, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. These are some of our more well-recognized standards. We run education courses, just like NAFA. We do e-learning programs. We, again, professional certifications. We have 7 individual certification programs, like NAFA has their own. This is another area, I think, where we can work well together. ASHRAE runs 120 to 130. This year, our target is 120 to 130 government outreach days at the state and local level. And for example, today we have a government outreach event taking place in Tennessee. Tomorrow we have one in Texas where we have 13 meetings with people on the Hill in the Texas State Capitol. So there's an opportunity, I think, for NAFA members to get involved. It's always good to speak with a louder voice, right? So the more that participate in those events, the better. We issue $450,000 in scholarships a year. So I want to really drill down. You hear a lot of comments about how, hey, you can get involved in ASHRAE standards, but we find that people really don't know how to do that. So I know ASHRAE publishes standards, but if I want to get involved, what does that look like? So first of all, how do you find out? When is a standard being revised? When is a new standard a new standard committee or guideline project committee being formed? Is it relevant to my business? Do I care, right? So we have a standards action newsletter for that. So you can go onto the ASHRAE website and simply sign up for the standards actions newsletter, right? And every Friday we issue this newsletter, and it will say which of our standard project committees are meeting and how you can connect with those meetings, right? It'll announce that a new standard is being written. It'll announce that an addenda to standard 52.2 is out for public review, for example. So it's on the ASHRAE website. You can engage that way. So a little bit of a drill down into ASHRAE standards, because I think that's and guidelines, because I think it's a huge opportunity for you guys to get involved. So not to get into a whole lot into process, but the way it originates is in a technical committee, right? So we have 100+ technical committees. And we referenced TC 2.4 earlier. So if a TC will originate a title, purpose, and scope of a standard, and then that goes to another committee, and then it goes on to our standards project liaison subcommittee, and Tech Council reviews the package. And it's that simple. But the thing that's important there is that the initiation of a new standard, and maybe we need new standards, for example, related to filtering out infectious aerosols from occupied spaces in commercial buildings. I don't know, but maybe we do. But if you're involved in a TC, in the right TC, you can play a role in initiating that standard. So TCs, our technical committees, also initiate research projects. So earlier I said that that's an opportunity for NAFA members to get involved. And so if you think there's a research project needed on a particular filter media, you can initiate a research project proposal through ASHRAE, right? And again, we spend $5 million. All those decisions are made by volunteer committees, and we spend about $5 million a year on research. So 100+ technical committees, you can see some of those that are referenced there. The previous presentation referenced TC 2.4, so you see that listed. But we also have TCs on fans and duct design, industrial process air cleaning, and the list goes on. So again, TCs originate research projects, they originate standards, and they originate new addenda for standards, right? And they even are used to update the ASHRAE handbook, right? So it's a lot of activity that gets initiated in those TCs. And I just want to mention, I've already mentioned that standard 52.2 is going through a revision right now. How many people are involved in that standard? Any few people? How many people are active in TC 2.4? If you're active on the standard, probably the same. A few more people. Good. Well, this is an important standard, of course, because that's the method of test for filter efficiency. So that is going through an active review right now. I think there's 4, you guys probably know more about this than I do, but I think there's 4 new addenda. So when I say addenda to a standard, what does that mean? So we divide changes to an existing standard up into buckets, right? And we're really strategic on how we define those buckets, because if the bucket's too big, then standard addenda never gets approved. But anyway, it's a bucket of changes. So an addenda is a bucket of changes coming for standard 52.2. And there are 4 buckets coming forward for that standard right now. You can get a complete list of TCs on the ASHRAE website. Many of them have their own website. I think this was the same image that was on the previous presentation. So how do you get engaged? Okay, I want to get engaged in a TC. Well, if you click on, I think it's the membership menu item there, right there, you have a big block that says Join TC 2.4. Now, does that mean you're committing yourself to do a whole bunch of things? No. Simplistically, that means that you're going to be on a mailing list to receive all the notifications, all the minutes, agendas, everything that's going on in TC 2.4. So that's one of the resources that was mentioned in the previous presentation, and this is how you do that. And one of the really interesting things that is going on at ASHRAE right now is a new standard, standard 241P, which is specifically on infectious aerosols. And you see the list there. Now, all of ASHRAE's standards are produced according to the American National Standards Institute process, right? ANSI. They're all ANSI standards. And that process takes a long time. So we have gone a little crazy, in ASHRAE terms, and we're developing this standard as a non-ANSI standard. So we were in touch with folks at the White House Coronavirus Response Team, and I think one of the things that's coming very soon is that the White House plans to announce the end of the pandemic, the official end of the pandemic, and I think that's probably going to happen sometime next month. You'll probably see that on the news in early next month. And so along with the official end of the pandemic, they want to announce all the things that have been done, right, to help protect people from future pandemics. And so one of the things they want to announce is an ASHRAE standard 241P. Now, we're probably not going to get it done by May. It normally takes about 2 to 3 years to produce a full ANSI standard. We've committed to doing this one in about 6 months. We're going to shadow the American National Standards Institute process. This is going to be a big deal. So we're going to deliver the standard in mid-June. We're going to have guidance tools in mid-May. So where's all this going to lead? At the end of the day, from a standards process, I really think that we're heading towards a national indoor air quality standard. And we really don't have one right now. We have a ventilation standard, right? ASHRAE ventilation standard 62.1, right? We've got filter testing standards, but we don't have, and we've got ventilation standards for hospitals. So you guys know we've got a lot of standards that drive ventilation in commercial buildings, but we don't have a comprehensive indoor air quality standard. And I really think that's where we're going to land. And I think, and I don't know if it's going to be in 2 years or in 5 years, but I think that's where it's going to land. And I think that standard is probably going to include and recommend as a best practice continuous indoor air monitoring, continuous IAQ monitoring for commercial buildings. I think that's coming.
Are your air filtration personnel NAFA certified? Ask if they belong to NAFA and have their certified air filter specialist or NAFA certified technician designations. The CAFS and NCT designations are earned after rigorous exams and demonstrate that the air filtration professional has a high degree of knowledge and professionalism. To learn more about NAFA certifications, visit nafahq.org.
So when I say a national IAQ standard, so ASHRAE Standard 90.1 is the national standard for energy efficiency in commercial buildings. That means it's been adopted into law, right? There's a law that says the states must enact building codes that are at least as stringent as ASHRAE Standard 9.1. So I think that's what's going to happen with a national IAQ standard. I think at some point very soon, driven by the pandemic and the momentum that has created, that we're going to end up with a national IAQ standard for commercial buildings, and it will include a requirement for continuous IAQ monitoring. So another thing that we're tracking, and frankly we're not very happy with right now, building codes and standards are a local jurisdiction phenomenon for the most part. So a group from Johns Hopkins University is developing a Model State Indoor Air Quality Act, and we're tracking it very closely. We're not, frankly, big fans of it right now, but we like the concept of developing a model code, if you will, a model piece of legislation that jurisdictions can choose to adopt with respect to indoor air quality, as long as it says the right things. And of course, the right things are what we think it should say, of course. But anyway, it is out there and something we are tracking very closely. And there's more of these, right? There's a lot of state and city-based jurisdictions, city and state jurisdictions that are developing these IAQ rules and regulations. It's something to keep an eye on. So one of the things that you can do, if you so choose, you can subscribe to the ASHRAE Government Affairs newsletter, completely free, don't have to be a member, not selling anything here. It's just a place where we're constantly flagging. We have people in Washington that are responsible for state and local government advocacy, and we're constantly flagging, hey, this state has an air quality piece of legislation that's coming forward. If you're in that market, you might want to be engaged in that. And in some cases, you might want to. So it's something we're tracking as well. Another huge priority for ASHRAE, and something that I think is going to have an impact here as well, is building decarbonization, right? You've all heard about this, but essentially the previous focus on energy efficiency, I think, is going to transition to decarbonization, right? So when we used to talk about you talk about, concerns about the pressure drop behind a certain filter in terms of getting to net zero energy, right? Net zero energy buildings. I think moving forward, that's going to change to net zero carbon buildings, right? That's where we're headed, and it's going to be a really big deal. So the numbers, I know you guys know most of this, but population growth going crazy, 24% increase in the next 30 years, and we are essentially going to build around the world a new New York City every month until 2060. So if you think about the fact that the built environment accounts for 40% of the carbon emissions in a developing economy, of energy and carbon emissions. So again, the built environment accounts for 40% of energy and carbon emissions in a developed economy, less in a developing economy, but in a developed economy. And we're building a new New York every month around the world. So carbon reduction and the impact it's going to have on everything tied to anything in the built environment is very, very, very real. So one of the things that you've seen a lot of, and you will see more of, is building performance standards. But this is not building performance standards from like 90.1, which is a prescriptive energy efficiency standard, right, for commercial buildings. How do you get to a certain level based on the type of building, right? When I say building performance standards in this context, I'm talking about the standards that jurisdictions are issuing about how they're going to reduce carbon emissions in the state of Oregon by 30% by the year 2030. Those types of jurisdictional-based aspirational goals tied to carbon reduction. And a lot of states and cities are doing this now, but they have no clue how they're going to get there. No clue, right? But a lot are doing that, and this is really going to have a big impact. So 25% of the buildings in the United States right now are currently covered by a building performance standard, one of these kind of overarching goals that says we're going to hit such and such amount of carbon reduction by such and such year. So this is carbon reduction in the built environment is going to be a very, very big deal. It's a disruptor. It's everything, right? So building decarbonization is not just about how much energy, right, the building is using. It's also about embodied carbon and the relationship between the embodied carbon in the components of the building and its operational carbon. It's very confusing, right? So how would this impact filters, right? I think moving forward, almost every filter is going to have an EPD. I think every component, every building component is going to have an environmental product declaration that's going to speak to its embodied carbon. Now, in a filter, how do you calculate the embodied carbon of a filter, right? That's a very complex question, right? Where did it come from? How much carbon was expended in the manufacturing of that particular device? What's the operational carbon impact? What's the pressure drop behind the filter? What kind of impact does that have on the carbon in the building? So, and if you're replacing carbons on a regular basis, you're not just looking at that one time, but you're saying over the life of this building or the life of this chiller or cooling tower or this system, I'm going to have to replace this filter X number of times, and the carbon impact of every one of those filters over the life of cycle of this building is X, right? And MEP design engineers, our core members, right, are already asking, right, where am I getting my EPDs so that I can push towards a net zero carbon building instead of a net zero energy building? This is going to define, in some cases, you know, what filters are going to be used. It's going to be one of the drivers, I believe. ASHRAE has formed a task force for building decarbonization. We have a lot of people involved in this. I won't spend a lot of time here. We're developing an awful lot of technical guidance on how to decarbonize the built environment. One of those documents is already out. It's completely free. I'm not selling anything here. It's called Building Performance Standards. It's on the ASHRAE website. It was done in partnership with Pacific Northwest National Labs. It's a really good document, so if you're interested in that, I'd encourage you to look that up. So another big thing we're talking about a lot at ASHRAE is artificial intelligence, right? And the impact it's gonna have on buildings. You've all heard of ChatGPT, right? And played with it and have been astounded by its performance, right? But how is that going to impact design engineering of a building? There are already, funded by venture capital, and I've seen a demonstration, there are already some systems that will design a building based on conversational input requirements. I want a 100,000 square foot metal building with R30 insulation, you know, you define it, right? And it will start to draw that building for you. That's happening now. Now, is it actively used? No, but I've seen a demonstration. It's being developed, and boy, if you don't think that artificial intelligence is going to have a big impact on the way buildings are designed and run, boy, it definitely will. Control systems. What is the main reason that buildings don't perform the way they're supposed to? I would suggest control systems, right? Maybe operator negligence, but control systems is one of the key reasons. And the impact on the grid building interface. We're thinking about how to use it from an ASHRAE standpoint. Is our information, all of our technical guidance, in a format that allows it to be actively used by artificial intelligence crawlers, if you will? What are the intellectual property repercussions of some external artificial intelligence device reaching into ASHRAE and grabbing our content and then pushing it out there and maybe coming to a wrong conclusion based on ASHRAE content? And then it gets implemented and, you know, you have $1 million design flaw in your system. What does that mean? And who's responsible, right? So anyway, I think that another thing we're tracking really closely is artificial intelligence. It's going to be a really big deal. It's potential to do wonderful things and also disrupt a lot of traditional things. So that's it. I hope you found that beneficial. Since I just talked about artificial intelligence, I reached out to GPT and I asked it, I said, how can NAFA and ASHRAE collaborate more effectively? And in about 10 seconds, it came back with that answer. It said, we can do joint research, we can do standards development, education and training, and advocacy, which all things considered is a spooky, correct type of answer, right? It's spooky to me. I'm frightened by, if you've picked up, I'm scared of artificial intelligence. So anyway, I hope that's useful. Be happy to take any questions about ASHRAE priorities, any of that stuff. Yes?
Yes, I'm wondering about the cost structure of your net zero energy building, how it compares to what you'd expect to pay in costs otherwise.
How the cost of building it, or how?
Well, the cost of building it and what you'd pay on a monthly basis if you were.
Yeah, so our net zero energy headquarters, so we got a lot of sponsorships when we built our building, right? Would we do that building if we were doing it as a commercial real estate developer, instead of as ASHRAE trying to demonstrate, a building, renovating a 1978 building to net zero energy performance? That's a difficult question. We probably would not have done all the things that we did. But for example, the payback on the PV system, the photovoltaic system, right? It's a 250 kilowatt photovoltaic system, which is the largest system a commercial account can have on Georgia Power's grid right now. The payback on that is 8 years. That's pretty quick. It's pretty quick. So after that, it's all gravy. So right now, and when I say that's the biggest PV system that Georgia Power allows, that's based on net metering. So you can, so we're net metering with Georgia Power, which means we're selling the power to them. And then if we need some, they're available for us to get power from them. But we're not quite at net zero. So we do get a bill, electricity bill, but I mean, it's, $500 right now instead of $5,000. So net metering with Georgia Power and the cap on the largest PV system in the state of Georgia is sort of a big deal. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the chat and the hospitality today. Appreciate it. One of the things I think I'd hoped to see today was lab space where these things are getting tested. And I understand that some of this is sent out to universities to do that work. So my question is, I guess, where does the test labs, or where do they exist? And I guess, how do you make sure that the standards are followed stringently?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So great question. We don't have labs at ASHRAE headquarters where we do the research sort of on site. We contract that out to national labs and to universities literally all over the world. Most of those universities are in the US. For every research project, there's a PMC, or a PMS, a project monitoring subcommittee that is responsible for monitoring the principal investigator for that particular study. So we have pretty tight controls over the research project. We have interim check-ins, right? We only pay our research project folks, annually, and those projects usually last 3 years. So, it's pretty tightly controlled. But most of it is done at universities, mostly in the U.S., some in Canada, and some offshore, and at some national labs. It's where most of that research is done. Any other questions about? Yes.
In regards to the EPD, you talked about the whole building lifestyle. I'm curious on the front end of that certification. So when we think about air filters, they would eventually have an EPD rating. How do components to those air filters play into that? Do you see those also requiring an EPD? And then even further back, their components. Yes, exactly. So
great question. And frankly, no one really knows how to generate EPDs right now. So one of the things to your point, one of the things we're thinking about is, should ASHRAE write standards on how to calculate the embodied carbon for an EPD of the components of a building? But to answer your question, theoretically, the full supply chain that went into creating that particular filter should be accounted for in that embodied carbon calculation. So everything. If it came from offshore, did it come by plane, train? But I guess it didn't come by a train, plane, or a boat. You have to factor that into the embodied carbon of that particular piece. But it's kind of the wild, wild west right now, because everyone thinks it's coming and everyone is thinking about it, but there's really, and there's a few databases, they're pretty small, with some EPDs for some pieces of equipment. It's very loose and undefined right now. But everyone knows that we have to, if we're going to decarbonize the built environment, we have to address embodied carbon as well as sort of the traditional operational carbon, or how much energy is the thing using and what's the profile, the energy generation profile of that particular utility. And everyone knows that, right? So we can take the profile from Georgia Power, right? And based on that energy creation profile, how much PV they have and how much other forms of renewable energy they have, right? And we can take our energy, our electricity uses and calculate the carbon equivalent based on that profile for Georgia Power, for us individually. So yeah, operational carbon is pretty simple, but embodied carbon is a lot more complex.
Thank you. I have one other question, if that's okay.
Yep.
On the government affairs topic, is there a group that is focused on indoor air quality and potential tax incentives that may be given depending on higher efficiencies or things that improve indoor air quality?
And I would say that indoor air quality right now is one of the most common things that when we go on Hill visits at state and local jurisdictions, or even in Washington, that indoor air quality is what people want to talk about, right? Is there a group that is specific to that within our sort of government affairs activity? I would say no, but it's omnipresent, right? It's almost every visit we make. That's one of the things that people want to talk about. I showed you that there's a lot of IEQ legislative activity out at the state and local level, and I just gave you some examples, but there's a lot of that going on, right? These government, these jurisdictions, they want to do something about healthy schools, right? There's a lot of money coming out from DOE, a ton of money coming out from DOE right now to support healthy schools in the Inflation Recovery Act and the Infrastructure Recovery Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. There was another question.
Some of us are familiar with LEED, and are there any ongoing collaborations with the U.S. Green Building Council sort of in this realm?
Yeah, sure. Yes, so ASHRAE and USGBC talk a lot. ASHRAE standards are referenced in LEED and used as the basis for some of the LEED ratings. In fact, we're going to be in Washington in May, and the guy who runs USGBC now, Peter Templeton, we're going to go visit with him and his team. And yeah, one of the things they're really focused on, though, as much as indoor air quality, is decarbonization. In fact, I think I can say this, they're planning to release a decarbonization in the real estate industry report alongside our decarbonization conference in October. So yes, USGBC is increasingly focused on health and human comfort in buildings, and that's a place where ASHRAE and USGBC can intersect and work together. So there are a lot of conversations like that. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Talking Air Filtration Podcast, a production of the National Air Filtration Association. Clean air matters.